because I think that's the single most important thing that I have to communicate. No matter what the rest of the workshop or the lecture is, the foundation for making almost anything work, from health to communication to relationships to marriage, the key is always the relationship with the self and establishing that self-worth and self-appreciation. It is a decision, it is something that you can do by discovering your own value. The value is there, it's undeniable, and it's pretty hard to miss if you do a little examination of what you are and what your inherent value is. If you have that as a basis, then you can take some other steps in forming relationships and marriage. I think, just to wake you up, we'll just shift now to sex. And then we'll talk about the other things. It can be a lively topic. Interesting thing in our culture is that we have a belief that sexuality, the expression and experience of it, are very, very important. And we have a belief that is somehow complex and powerful. And because it is so important as a factor in our happiness and development, and because it's so complex and such a powerful thing, we've decided not to talk about it. Have you noticed that? I mean, the more important something is, the more people avoid the communication about it somehow. The two most difficult things to discuss in our culture are sex and money. And we're all rather addicted to both of them, to some extent. Mark Twain once pointed out that that the thing that man seems to live for more than anything else is the sexual experience, the fulfillment of the sexual experience. And as a matter of fact, there are lots of things that human beings tend to like: joy, happiness, fun, little expression of excitement, and so on. And he pointed out that everything that we really enjoy is excluded from our religious idea of heaven. Have you ever noticed that? No sex in heaven. You know, in fact, he pointed out that that all of the things that we least like to do, I mean, sitting through long sermons, singing hymns, sitting around playing musical instruments, not one man in 100 plays a musical instrument. But the beliefs that we're given is that that's all we're going to do in heaven, sitting around playing harps and singing hymns and, you know, worship, praise services. We can't stand 30 minutes a week here. Have you ever had this idea of that wonderful place where we're going to do those things? There's something sort of imbalanced about those ideas, I think, that we avoid talking about the things that make up such an important part of our lives. I think that that a healthy relationship with sexuality is one in which we can discuss our feelings and share with one another, particularly in marriage and particularly before marriage. Whether you share the experience itself, and I'm not going to take a particular stand on that because I don't think that it is necessary, but it is necessary and vitally important for people considering coming together as partners to understand one another sexually. What the things are that you have wondered about, what you enjoy, what your needs are, and how those needs express. And I've found that most married couples that I have counseled with really don't know about the others, each knowing about the other's feelings. They haven't discussed it. And if they try to discuss it, it's too embarrassing, too difficult. I don't want to admit what I feel. You know, if people are having difficulty in the sexual experience, it's an interesting thing. Have you any idea how many wives find it much easier to tell me the problem than to tell their husband? And very often, I'm a stranger to them. They've heard of me or they've seen me once or twice, but they sit down and they tell me all of these needs. And then, of course, I say, well, have you discussed this with him? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Here are two people living together, sharing the same bed, eating at the same breakfast table, sometimes, and they can't discuss this thing that is so important, that is causing stress and frustration in their lives. And of all things, I can't really tell him what I would like him to do or how I would like him to do it. Can't get into that communication. The first experience that I think that we must have, must liberate in ourselves about sexuality is giving ourselves and our partners the freedom to discuss, to express, and to explore. And if that total exploration, the finding out about my own feelings, you know, that's an interesting thing too about this communication about sexuality. One of the reasons that we find it difficult to express to a partner is because we find it very difficult to admit to ourselves our own feelings, because we've grown up in an irrational culture that has taught us from birth that this very important thing is not to be discussed. We don't talk about it. We might spend a lot of time doing it, but we don't admit that we spend any time doing it. We're supposed to pretend that it doesn't even happen, that children sort of happen by accident. And we don't really know how that occurred. It isn't discussed, it isn't faced. Sexuality is important. It is important for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons being that the energy, the vitality of the life force in you and me is really the source of our creativity, of our health and healing ability, of the ability to heal our own bodies. The vitality of passion and life force is that which can make a man a genius. Now, some of the things that I'm going to share with you now are not necessarily from a scientific point of view. So I want to establish that at the beginning and say to you that there may be authorities in the field of psychology or medical work or whatever that are not going to agree with what I'm going to share with you now. But there is a way that you can know whether I'm right or whether I'm not, and that is to explore it in yourself, to find out for yourself whether this is correct. And I think you'll find that it is. The reason that sexuality has played a vitally important role in religion and in every other area of life throughout history is because it is so powerful. It is powerful for transformation. It is powerful for healing, for vitality in life, for joy of life. It is the source of passion. It is the source of emotional fulfillment. It is the source of creativity, of artistry. And it is the source of the ability to think clearly. Now that part may sound strange to you. And I'm going to use a model here on the blackboard that is that's really from the yoga disciplines. But I also want to point out that this same model is used in many other disciplines. I'm just going to put 7 circles up here at first. And these represent something that in yoga disciplines are called the 7 chakras, or the 7 wheels. Now, just to make a comparison here, this is from Tantra yoga, or Kundalini yoga, that we're talking about. But the Apostle John, in the book of Revelation, wrote about these same factors as 7 seals. 7 gates, 7 doorways, 7 books sealed with seals. And referred to them as being books that contain knowledge so powerful that to open it under the wrong circumstances is destructive, and he described that as being like 7 vials of wrath or 7 plagues that could destroy the earth. But he also described them as unsealed or opened under the proper circumstances are the energy of transformation that make these 7 levels of consciousness into 7 heavens. So it is written about in Christian mystical literature. It is written about in China. In China, in fact, in the center here is something called the Qi, or the Qi, or the Kai, as it is said in some translations. This energy is referred to as the vitality of life. It is said in the East to enter through the solar plexus, just below the rib cage, a center that is magnetic and draws into itself vital force from the universe. Not necessarily solar energy, but heavenly energy, or energy of the heavens, or energies of the universe. Described as perhaps something akin to electromagnetics, but in any case, vitality. According to the Chinese, the energy enters here and goes down to the base of the spine. Now, in the yogic discipline, this bottom circle here is at the base of the spine, and they describe it as being the head of a serpent. And in fact, the yogic discipline describes a center path or a center pillar that is very often called a rod, or it is called the Shushumna. In the Sanskrit terms, it's called the center pillar in the terms of the Kabbalah, and this center rod is said to be entwined by 2 serpents. These serpents cross one another through each one of these circles. And it is said that these 2 serpents are charged with energy or polarity, and they are opposite polarity, so that one is negative and one is positive. Now, an interesting thing about this design, if this center rod were a crystal, say for example a ruby rod, and this were a positive electrical wire, and this were a negative electrical wire, then our diagram is a diagram of a laser beam. And the thing that I want to point out about that is these 2 crisscrossing, polarized energy sources crossing over a center force cause an energy to flow from one end to the other through that center force and to be focused very sharply through the top of that. If these 2 wires, if we can call them that, are highly charged with energy, and that flow goes in an uninterrupted manner from the bottom to the top, then a very cutting, potent, powerful, concentrated, focused beam of light, or something akin to light, is going to be focused through that center pillar. According to the ancient writers, the mystics of ancient civilizations, that arousal of that light, or fire, or focus, is the experience of enlightenment. It is said that to focus that light clearly in this way, if it penetrates or goes through or opens this final seal, the crown seal, then the intelligence of the individual is transformed. Not only the intelligence, but abilities in many other ways. But the important thing, perhaps, for us is the opening of the intelligence to a greater understanding. The being who has not aroused that light or energy to the crown is captured within a structure that is the dimension of these 7 centers. But once that crown is opened, he is no longer captured within it, but is released in his intelligence from it, which means this: being captured in the body of the beast The intelligence is limited to what can be gathered through the senses of that animal, that flesh. When that crown is opened, it is said, the intelligence can gather information not limited to the facilities of those senses, but rather can gather information from universal consciousness or higher consciousness or God consciousness. In fact, the experience of opening that crown center is called God consciousness or cosmic consciousness. And those who have experienced it have abilities to know things that are not the result of sensory experience. And if you doubt all of that, if it all sounds like a fairy tale, one of the things to keep in mind is that from time to time, generation after generation, all the way back to the beginning of history, there have been historical accounts of individuals who have been able to demonstrate similar things. And there are too many of those accounts to simply discredit them all. There is something that can happen that can transform human intelligence. And there's very good evidence that it has to do with this vitality that expresses as sexuality. Now, religion got into this furor primarily because all the way back to Abraham and beyond, in fact, long before Abraham appeared on the scene, this idea was being written about in the walls of the Egyptian temples. And you can see elaborate schemes of the use of this kind of energy, diagrams laid out in rituals on the walls of Egyptian temples. But Abraham as well, and the prophets following him, and Jesus Christ, and the apostles, and particularly the Roman Catholic Church, have made quite a big fuss about this energy that has resulted in the celibacy rule for priests in the Catholic Church, based originally on the idea that if one never wastes this energy through sexual expression, which is related to these lower two centers, sexual expression would mean that this electrical energy is diverted here at its lowest level instead of being allowed to flow through to its highest level. The theory then was, if a man is going to be a priest, an enlightened individual, then he wants to capture that energy so that it will rise rather than being wasted in a physical expression. And the belief that that was important, to retain that energy so that the intelligence would be illumined and the being would be transformed, that belief is responsible not only for the practice of celibacy in the church, but also for the dire warnings to youngsters to avoid masturbation, to avoid sexual expression at all except for procreation. The enormous amounts of beliefs and taboos and things that we have come to call morality are based on the belief that this very powerful energy must be contained and that it must be used and expressed only under very specific conditions, which must be related to spirituality and control, rigid control. There's something inherent in human beings that recognizes the power of sexual experience and sexual energy. Now, the energy that we're talking about is not really sexual energy. It is identified with sexuality because that is one of the expressions of it. But that same energy manifesting on other levels is also creative energy, that which allows us to express artistically, to create or invent a new idea, discoveries, changes, transformations in society. Geniuses are almost always individuals who have enormous passions. Passions in the sense of being very vital, very alive, very expressive with this kind of energy which might express sexually, might express emotionally, might express through physical expressions of energy, or might express through creativity or profound thought, might even express as a mystic experience, which usually is described in these individuals. When this energy is retained and breaks through the crown, the description of that experience is almost always described as a burst of light, followed by a clarity of thought that was unusual in quality and extensive beyond the experience of the senses in the information that came to the individual. Very often, these mystical experiences or breakthroughs are quite temporary things. But even if they're temporary, the individual is left with an experience that adds a quality to his life. He's gotten a glimpse of a thinking ability that still makes his thought, even afterward, even after it is shut down again, his thought is still superior to that which it was before, and usually superior to his fellows. One who remains open and retains that openness or enlightenment is a stupendous individual, one of those that history writes about, and is usually turned into a god or a demigod worshipped by his fellows. Now, what does that mean for you and me? I suspect that some of you suspect that I'm going to advocate some kind of spiritual celibacy, or in some way restraining or regulating or holding on to your energy. You know, what I'm going to suggest instead is that celibacy, while it may work for some individuals, is usually practiced by suppressing the passion, suppressing the energy that wants to express. The only way that most people can remain celibate, if anybody does, is to repress and suppress that urge repeatedly until it becomes less and less and less, and the flame dies out. And if you think there is any hope of enlightenment for that individual, you're wrong. Unless that flame is rekindled of the passions, he's not going to be enlightened. So I'm not about to suggest celibacy for you. Although it might be right for some individuals, that's going to depend on your guidance. What you find from within yourself is best for you. What I am going to suggest is that you recognize the power of the vitality that is within you. And when you use it in any way, use it responsibly. Know that that's what you want to do with it. Know that if you're going to share that experience with a partner, that you are sharing your vitality with a partner that will complement you in every way. Someone that you want to form a bond with, share a life with, or at least share an experience of lifting your consciousness, your worth, your value as an individual to a higher level. You may use it purely for entertainment. And if you do, I'm not particularly concerned with the morality of that, because my belief is that what we call morality is nothing more than a set of laws that people have not understood, and so they built superstition around it. If it's wrong, there's a reason why it's wrong. And if it's wrong, and we are going to observe the wrongness of it, we should understand what the reason is. Using your sexual energies for entertainment is nothing more than taking an energy that has a great potential and using it for less than its ultimate potential. And if it's wrong for that reason. And when it is shared with a partner, it may be wrong for another reason, because there's another thing that happens with this energy. And perhaps the best way that I can explain that is to first point out that in the male, it is said, these wheels turn. And in the male, those wheels turn clockwise. And it means that the positive polarity is on the left side in the male, and the negative on the right. And it is reversed in the female. so that the base chakra in the female turns in the opposite direction from that of the male. Now, because they turn in the opposite direction, when they are brought together and those energies are mingled, they form a magnetic attraction, so that the energy of one is shared into the energy of the other, and the two are both polarized and recharged by that energy if the experience is accomplished appropriately. Now, that may happen and it may not. And whether it happens or doesn't is dependent on this. One of the other things that I want to say about that, by the way, when that energy is shared, a bond is created between those two individuals. And the ancient teachers of these disciplines say that when that bond is created between two individuals, it is a permanent bond that is very difficult to undo and separate. And for as long as that bond is maintained, the experiences of one will affect the experiences of the other, to the extent that one of those partners, separated by many miles from the other, may feel bad because of the other one having an emotional attack or an illness or whatever, someplace distantly removed. So if I am bonding myself in this manner to somebody who's having erratic ups and downs and severe problems, then I'm going to have the stamina within me to correct the imbalances that will come in waves through this Akka cord, as it is called, between me and this individual that I've bonded myself to. Now, that's the primary reason that I would suggest to anybody: be very careful in your selection of a partner that you would share yourself so intimately with. If you're going to build a bond that can affect you emotionally and health-wise, be sure that that's an individual that you would like to be bonded to, that you would like to share the vital force of. Now, whether that's valid or not is something you probably have to test for yourself. I certainly have satisfied myself that that is valid. And one of the ways that I have satisfied myself that that is valid is to watch what happens when two people have created that bond, and then they break up. The relationship breaks up. Even if those two people no longer like one another, have nothing in common and don't share, but they have been living together, and they separate distance-wise, they will actually experience pain in the center of themselves, very often physical pain, and very often physical illness, trying to sever the cord that they have built between them. And you can't say it's just an emotional cord, or it's just a psychological thing that they're going through, because we're talking about two individuals who no longer have a psychological involvement or emotional involvement with one another. They're separated because that involvement is no longer there. They weren't experiencing it. But they are surprised to find out that there still is a cord, and it's a very, very sticky, difficult to describe thing that keeps them connected and maintains a pain through the period of trying to sever it. And by the way, if people are going through trying to sever that, the most effective means of completing the cutting of that cord is not allowing your mind to think of that other individual. Going to the extent of avoiding any thought, any wondering, any image, recognizing the name or whatever, so that if a thought of that other individual comes into your mind, don't try not to think of them, but rather immediately think of someone else or something else. That other person that you turn your attention to will begin to get the energy that was invested in that bond, and you will begin to sever that one and build a new one in the direction that you're now sending your consciousness. But most of all, be careful who you build the bond with and how you build those relationships. Now, when you do come together in a sexual experience with a partner, perhaps in your marriage, How do you make certain that you do accomplish that polarizing and recharging of one another with vitality and health? What should ideally happen in a sexual relationship is that both partners should, after the experience, after the orgasm, if that occurs for both, after that experience, both should feel recharged and vitally alive with new energy, new vitality. They should feel refreshed, fulfilled, and completed. Now, if that doesn't sound like what you experience after a sexual experience, then the other possibility is that you feel nice, perhaps, but exhausted, depleted, and feel as if you have lost a part of your vitality that you're going to miss tomorrow. And however much you enjoyed this moment, you may be aware that tomorrow you're going to wish that perhaps you hadn't until the weekend, so that you could have saved your vitality for work and for thinking and other things. If the experience is draining you and is leaving you feeling empty or exhausted or depleted, then there is something wrong in the way that you are meshing in your relationship with your partner. Something is not matching in the experience. And I'll give you a little clue about what that might be and perhaps how to change it. You don't mind if we go into this in depth, do you? Is anybody uncomfortable with talking about this? Can I use any word I want to? Okay, let's get into it. One of the things that you may have noticed in the sexual experience is that as you're coming together, or before you're coming together, your mind might be anywhere. You're thinking about all sorts of things, even as you're beginning to build, to warm up, to being together passionately. But as you come together more and more, and energy is aroused and vitalized within you, your thoughts become more and more and more centered or one-pointed. And in fact, this is an experience that should continue to build to a single-pointed focus right up until the moment of orgasm. And in fact, it's one of the things that allows orgasm to occur. It occurs at the moment when your consciousness and your energy are the most single-pointed, one-pointed that they will ever become. Now, you can accomplish that one-pointedness in concentration and in meditation, just as you can accomplish it in sexuality. In sexuality, when that one-pointed focus comes, that is the split second before orgasm, your vital energies, the vital energies of your body and probably those of your partner, are built to a peak in your body so that your cells, your nerves, your muscles throughout your body are charged with vitality. Now, unfortunately, the thing that happens in the next moment is release. Release meaning that I turn loose of all of that I have built up. And it goes from me in a rush, whether male or female. I turn it loose, the muscles lose their tone, I relax, and all that I built up in energy rushes out. If I'm lucky, perhaps that energy rushes into the vitality of my partner. But if the partner has done the same thing that I have, and we both have simply released, rather than absorbing deliberately, then we're both going to be depleted. In the mystery schools that practice the Tantric tradition, whether in India or in China or in Egypt or ancient Greece, in all of those where the practice was a part of their training and their attempts at enlightenment, the instruction was given to build to the point of orgasm, but avoid the orgasm, so that the energy of the orgasm is absorbed by the body. Now that's going to seem less than ideal for some of you. So I'm happy to report that there's another qualification to the technique, and that has to do with this. At the moment of orgasm, the key to the retention of the vital energy is not a matter of the retention or the loss of fluid, but it is the retention of the energy and vitality that is built. So the escape of fluid is not the concern, but that turning loose of the consciousness, the awareness of the energy, of the muscles, the muscle tone, of the vitality in the body. The turning loose of that is the key. And one of the practices that is given to the Tantric masters for that retention is focused on a sphincter muscle that is used for release or retention of fluid, both in the male and the female. That is necessary for relieving yourself, for being able to retain with that muscle. That muscle is actually exercised by the Tantric masters to make it stronger, so that at the moment of orgasm, that muscle is tightened. Fluid still escapes, not necessarily as much, but more important, it's not the escape of the fluid, but the tightening of it is for the psychological and the conscious decision to hold what I have built, to return it in me. And the consciousness at the same time is turned toward the base chakra, or the bottom of the spine, and is sent on a journey through those centers to the crown. So what I'm doing is, for lack of a better word, I am imagining or visualizing the vitality that I have built and that I have focused. I am imagining and feeling and causing and visualizing that energy going into and through this rod, and right up through the center of myself, I see a light, a fire, and I feel an energy and a vitality that is focused from all over me, that is going through me, rushing to my consciousness, and the place that I really want to experience the orgasm, finally, is in the crown. If I can experience it here, then I will also experience the release of energy or vitality there that will affect my thinking, my consciousness, my creativity. Interesting thing about the crown orgasm that you might want to know. If you ever thought that a genital orgasm was pleasant, you experience nothing yet until you feel a crown orgasm. It is an incredible experience, just from the point of the enjoyment of it, if nothing else. To wonder whether you would exchange one for the other. Let me assure you, if you ever experience the crown orgasm, you never give it a second thought. That's the one you want. The Tantric masters would tell you it's 7 times greater. And I think that's probably valid to say. If you can imagine something 7 times better than orgasm, that's the crown orgasm. But it's not just for the pleasure of the experience. The importance of that is for its ability to transform the mind, to enlighten consciousness, to enhance vitality, and to heal the body. The healing energies of your body are controlled or focused by this second center, or seal, or state of consciousness. The glands and organs that release the white blood cells and lymphocytes, leukocytes, the thymus gland control, and so on, are regulated by that second center. If that second center then is vitalized in that experience, one of the keys for example, to the cure of cancer, particularly what is called terminal cancer. Whenever there has been a reversal of that, or what do they call it, spontaneous remission, which has happened, but in any case that it has happened, it has been discovered later that the thymus gland was reactivated and was enlarged. Note that that's the only gland that gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we get older. Well, in a case where there is a recovery from a disease like that, that is called a terminal disease, or is something that is systemic and pervasive, you're going to find an enlarged thymus because it was reactivated and turned loose, an enormous amount of healing energy. And the key to doing that is to reverse this energy flow and let it go back through the body. There are some people, I think, here tonight who have seen an example of that. I had a friend maybe 5, 6 years ago that I saw one day and recognized just from seeing him, because there was a black cloud around him, which I saw, and it was so obvious that I was certain that anybody else could see it. Nobody else responded. I asked him about it, asked him if he was feeling well. He assured me that he was. Wasn't anything wrong. Which concerned me all the more because I didn't want to stand there and tell this guy, there's something wrong with you because I see it around you. I didn't want to scare him to death if there's nothing really going on. So when he said he was feeling all right, I said, well, have you been recently ill, or are you just getting over something? No, not that either. That concerned me because I didn't know what to say next. But I did tell him, I think you ought to have a checkup. I don't want to frighten you, but I think you ought to have a doctor look at you and give you a physical exam, because I am seeing something that concerns me. And when I told him that, he said, well, there is one little thing that I hadn't thought that was all that important. He says, I have a boil on the inside of my thigh, a big sore. And it's been sore for a while, and it's not healing, and, but I didn't think it was that important. When he went to the doctor to have it looked at, he found that this staphylococcus infection in his leg had gone into the bone, and at that point in the bone, he had bone cancer. And the bone cancer had gone through his body and had already metastasized, which meant that it was pretty pervasive. It was affecting other organs and glands. And the doctor, of course, recommended all of the emergency measures, chemotherapy, all of that. But he also didn't give him much encouragement. He said it's really too far gone for us to get it by surgery. And the best that we can do is focus these energies on your body and see what happens. So he came back to me and he said, this is the situation, what do I do? And the energy that I knew could reverse this situation is the energy of sending that vital force through his endocrine system, reactivating that gland that controls the body's defense systems, turn it back on again by the use of vital energy. Now that put me in this situation. I was sitting there with this man and wife and talking with them about their sexual experience, but I did because I believed that it could save his life. So I sat down with them and I described to them how to use the energy of sexuality. You can imagine that a fellow who's being depleted now by this cancer is not going to have a lot of vital energy for sexual expression. But I assured him that it was important enough for him to be able to focus this energy, to invest it in this way, and to concentrate on sending that energy through the body. He did heal himself. There are no traces of it now. He's very strong, vitally life, but most important, when he began to work with this, he also began to channel. He began to do readings for his friends, and began to teach because his consciousness was transformed, not just his physical body. His consciousness was transformed in an interesting way that turned his energy in a new kind of direction. That has to be coupled with the rational thought energy. You are awakening the sensitive side or the receptive side, but the positive or rational side must be awakened with it to keep it in balance then, and take it in the right direction. But this is the power of sexuality as I have seen it, to heal the body, to transform the consciousness, to enhance the experience of the bonding together. And bonding is a very important experience between parent and child, between husband and wife. One of the single most important things to the success and health of an individual is the bonding between a newborn baby and his mother. If that happens immediately at birth, and if that is the first person that that baby is bonded with, then there is a sense of security that will allow that child to feel good about himself, to feel confident, and to feel safe enough so that his life is not ruled by fear. By doing that, he will accomplish what I've been calling the golden key more quickly. For individuals who are born in hospitals in our day and time and are separated from the mother at birth, the first bonding that they have is with a doctor who gave them a smart insult right across the rear end and subjected them to a few other assaults, and then puts them in a room away from the mother where they might be able to see her in a day or several hours, both of them drugged by pain drugs. That bonding does not occur. And that child grows for years and years with a fear of abandonment by that mother, because the bonding didn't occur and the security of that relationship was not established in consciousness in the first few hours of life. There's very good evidence for the reality and the validity of that bonding. If you want to know more about it, there is a current book called The Magical Child that goes into a lot of detail about the bonding and the necessity of it. But that bonding for the security of the child, if it happens, you'll see a child who grows up feeling secure in his relationship with his mother in particular, more so than with the father. The bonding with the mother is more important at that stage. If it occurs, then he feels secure that he is loved. When he begins to form relationships, even at age 3 and 4, he will form relationships in a confident manner, not afraid of, not suspecting that he is going to be rejected. And because he forms those confident relationships, when he forms a marriage relationship, it'll be formed from a space of feeling good about himself. And so he will give to the relationship and not be a leech absorbing from the relationship without giving in turn, which is one of those difficult situations in which marriage is built. Now, the thing that I'm really trying to communicate here is that sexuality is important for more reasons than enjoyment, because in a right relationship, it will give vitality, physically, mentally, spiritually, to the nerves, the emotions, all of that in a relationship, and will form a repeating and continuous bond between the two individuals. And where that relationship is satisfactory, there will be less concern for the communication between the two, less of arguing, for example. Not just because the person is sexually satisfied, but because his vitality or her vitality is complete and whole and satisfied, recharged by the relationship with one another. When that happens, then, there is an interesting thing that happens in communication between the two. When you look at the difference between a happy marriage and an unhappy marriage, the difference between those two is not a matter of how often they disagree. Interesting fact, but it is a fact. It is not based on how often they disagree. A couple with a happy marriage may argue or disagree just as often as a couple with an unhappy marriage. What then makes the difference? The difference is in the quality of the argument, or in the reaction to or relationship to the argument. What happens, the way that they argue. And basically, that difference is built like this. There are three parts to an argument. almost every case that happens to either kind of couple, the happy or the unhappy. See if I can get all of this on the board. The first step I call escalating. Escalating means that you start with a communication that you are slightly uncomfortable about something. And when that communication is even hinted by one of the partners, then the other partner comes out with something that they are slightly unhappy about in turn, and there is escalating. It's also called, in psychiatry, it's called establishing the agenda for the argument. The reason that I call it escalating is because that's the way the agenda is established. It starts with one item, which is not too important, and it goes to more important items in which there is more involvement, not more important, but items in which there is more feeling. It escalates. And then the argument becomes about something else other than what originated. The second part of an argument is called combat, in which there is a contest between the two to get the other to hear. Now, the contest is not to make a point. And that's an interesting thing. Now, if you will watch this happening between you and your partner, you will find that what you think is going on is not really going on. You are not trying to make a point. You are trying to win combat. You are trying to get another partner to be affected by your energy, not necessarily by what you say. In fact, you may surprise yourself sometimes and find that that you didn't really want them to agree with the point that you were making because you didn't believe the point either. But you did want them to be affected by the energy that you were putting into the combat. And then the third stage of an argument is called negotiation. Now, the primary difference between a happy couple and an unhappy couple is not the difference between these three stages. They both go through all three. But the happy couples experience less of this and a shorter period of this and spend most of their time on this. An unhappy couple spends a lot of time on this and maybe a great deal of time on this, though not necessarily. This is rather short and vicious in many cases. And this, very often, is quite delayed. It may happen later. And the real contest is in which one is going to establish this step. In a relationship with a happy couple, both of them rush to this step to establish that and make that the point of their argument. When that happens, then you have communication. And when this is delayed, or when there is a belief between the two that if I start that, it means that I have lost the argument. Where there is that belief, of course, that belief is based on a lack of self-worth, isn't it? Insecurity makes me afraid to enter this phase. If I am secure, then I get to this phase and share and finish. There's a difference in what you will hear between the two. When you are escalating with an unhappy couple, you have something else that I call diversion sequences. A diversion sequence is when, let's say a couple comes together, man and wife, he's just coming home from work, and she comes to pick him up from the commuting station, let's say. And she's dressed because she wants to go from there to dinner. She's been saving money all week so that they could afford dinner from her food budget. Now he's exhausted, he's just getting off work, and he comes to the car. And before she can suggest this nice dinner, he is saying to her, I'm awfully tired, why don't we just go and get a hamburger? And her response is, You always do that. You never want anything but a hamburger. And then she goes into diversion sequence. The diversion sequence is, you don't appreciate what I've been doing all week. You think that I sit around and I don't have anything to do all day. You don't appreciate the fact that I need to get out once in a while. You never want to take me out. And these are statements, diversions from where they were going. All that really needed to happen was, when he said, I'm tired, if it's a happy couple, if it's a supportive couple, then she says, I can see you're tired. And there was something that I wanted, but I appreciate that you're tired, and perhaps we can plan it another time. Interesting thing that will happen now is that he will say, I'm really not that tired, let's go and do it. Neither of them had that much invested in whether they do or whether they don't. What they had invested was self-worth and a need for understanding from the other. The interesting thing is that people don't usually want their point to be made. What they want is understanding of where they're coming from. If you can understand that in your communication with yourself and your partner, what your partner wants is not to get his way. What he wants is to have what he does need understood. And when he gets that understanding, chances are that he'll want to do it your way, or she, whichever direction that's coming from. And keep in mind that that is literally the difference between a happy marriage and a non-happy marriage. The single most important factor is knowing what your partner wants. What your partner wants is not to get their way, not to be the boss, not to dictate. What your partner wants is to be heard and understood. Heard for what they're really saying, what they're really feeling. They want a caring expressed and an understanding. How can you do that? You can do that by a process that I call the Tao of communication. That first word may not be one that you're familiar with. T-A-O. It's a word from the Taoist persuasion of China. And the Tao means the absolute balance or absolute harmony. And I use that term in communication because the Tao is symbolized by this symbol of the balance between the yin and the yang, or the masculine and the feminine. The key to whole communication, to balanced and effective communication, is knowing when to be yin and when to be yang, because communication is a sexual experience. I told you we were going to talk about sexual evening. Sexual experience in this way. Communication is the act of a creative principle or a masculine energy. Now this is the idea that one is communicating. The one who is talking is being yang, putting out a masculine force. The one who is listening is being yin, receptive, taking in that energy. And if that one who is being yin actually does take in the thought, the idea, the understanding, the communication of the other one, it is incubated by the yin and birth occurs. The birth is the understanding or the Tao of the communication that occurs between the two of them. The key to never having an argument is to understand the Tao of communication, which happens this way. When someone is being yang, what I need to do is be yin. And I am yin for as long as I am taking in and understanding and absorbing what that other person is trying to tell me. Now there's a belief in our culture that we have to get our point across. That's a matter of pride, it's a matter of expressing myself. It's very important to get you to hear my point. I must make my point. And so, conversation usually happens this way. Even not necessarily among married couples, but right here in the foyer on the break. You'll see two people standing there, both mouths going, of course, at the same time. Or one of them starts conversation, gets halfway through the sentence, and the other's mouth flies open. The mouth flew open because that other one thinks, I've already heard you, I've heard enough, now I want to make my point. The interesting thing is that when the mouth flies open, the ears close at the same time. So that person who was talking, if he's smart, when he sees that other mouth fly open, he might as well stop mid-sentence, mid-word. He might as well stop right then, because to say the rest of his sentence will be useless. That other person cannot hear. You cannot hear when you yawn, because you hear with your mind, not with your ears. You hear with your mind. And when your mind is preoccupied with what you want to say when that person shuts up, then what you are hearing is your thought, your response. And what will happen is, a little later, that other person will say, you know, when I said so-and-so, and you will say to them, that's not what you said, I heard what you said. But what you heard was your response to what you thought they said, which they never got a chance to say, because you went yawn in the middle of their yawn. Okay? So there are three kinds of communication, except two of them aren't really communication. The three kinds are a yang and a yin together. That's a whole communication. The other is two yins together. An example of two yins in a conversation is, what do you want to do now? I don't know, what do you want to do? Neither will assert themselves, neither will become yang in the conversation. What are we going to talk about? Well, I don't know, didn't you have something you wanted to talk about? Two yins, nothing happens. Two yangs is an argument. They are both trying to get their point across. It may not be literally an argument in that they're not agreeing. They're not disagreeing necessarily. They just both have their mouth open and they are trying to outdo each other. The voices get louder and louder. Neither of them hears the other, but everybody else hears both of them. That's two yangs. The key to the Tao of communication is watch carefully what the other partner is doing. And every time the other partner becomes yang, you become yin. I'm going to tell you a little secret. If you feel worried about giving up your opportunity to make your point, then you should know about the martial arts discipline of Tai Chi. There are lots of martial arts disciplines. Most of them are very heavy, forceful yang disciplines. They just batter people, bash them around, all that sort of thing. Tai Chi, on the other hand, is a yin discipline. And it is based on the old Chinese proverb that says that a stone is stronger than water, but water washing over a stone will wear it down and destroy it. The yielding power of yin is stronger than the forceful power of yang. Now, the way that is demonstrated in a communication is this. I have a point that I want to make, something that I want to tell you or teach you, and I'm just itching to give you my knowledge. But I meet you, and you are determined to give me your knowledge. So if I'm smart, I will become yin. And I will become yin and draw you out. I will not just listen to what you have to say. I'll become even more yin and ask you to tell me more and more and more, and I probe until I know everything that you know about that subject. Now, I have all that I know and all that you know, and you only know what you know. Now who won the argument? Keep in mind that that ability to listen will equip you to have the knowledge of understanding the depth of what your partner is feeling And that is the key to making a marriage work. In the beginning of a marriage, before a marriage happens, this is one thing I always counsel a couple to do. And if they will do it, it will make a very, very important difference in the quality of their marriage. It is a technique that I call the 24-hour marathon session, or talkathon session. And what it amounts to is giving each of the two partners a full 24-hour period of time, which may be done in one single 24-hour period if you want, or it may be split up over 2 or 3 days. But the process is that for as long as it takes you to exhaust everything that you can think of to talk about yourself in any area, then one partner is yin for 24 hours, no less. Even if that's 1 hour at a time, it has to be 24 hours before the other one before you swap and the other one becomes yang. And what you do in the process is start with your life story. If you are married and you have never heard your partner's life story in absolute detail, minute detail, all about their growing up years, what they experienced, what they felt, what their first sexual awareness was, what their first sexual experience was like. If you're afraid of knowing that, you've already got a problem in your marriage. If you're afraid of sharing that with the person you're married to, you have a problem in your marriage. If you can't open from the depths of you and share what you are and what you felt and why you felt it, what your values are, what your beliefs are, what your hurts have been, what your pain has been, what you have been through, if you haven't totally expressed every particle of yourself, then you ought to do so. Even if your marriage is 20 years old. At this point, sit down together, give yourself a weekend apiece. 1 weekend for him, 1 weekend for you. And during his weekend now, you're only allowed to ask questions and to probe, and your job is to keep her talking for an entire weekend, at least 24 hours of actual talking. And if there is anything that you feel that you don't know, then probe and ask. Now, if you see that your probing is threatening, then probe in a different area. Don't try to make a person divulge things that they're not comfortable about putting out. Don't get into those things, but get into letting that person share their feelings as deeply as they possibly can. And once you have done that, the experience for me, the first time I did that, was actually not in marriage, it was with my brother. My brother and I had hated each other very actively and very violently for 30 years. And I thought I knew him. I mean, I knew exactly what it was like. I've been through it all. He knew exactly what I was like. We weren't interested. But when we started that marathon of communication, I found out that I had a brother that I was absolutely proud of. I mean, that really shocked me. He had qualities that I never dreamed that he had. We are still very much unlike, very different from one another. But I found qualities in him that I wish I had. And they're natural to him, they're easy. And they're things I have to work on. And I found a depth in him that I didn't know existed. And I found something that allowed our communication to be totally different, to the extent that when I talk with him now, I know what he's saying, I know where it's coming from, and I feel it. And while I may disagree with it, I disagree, very deeply disagree, with some things that he's committed to. Even disapprove of them. He has prejudices that I disapprove of, but I understand how he built that prejudice, how committed to it he is, and that it isn't something that is angry or mean on his part. It's a part of himself, it's fear. And I hear it, I know where it comes from. I don't think it's possible to start an argument between us now. because of the depth of understanding as a result of that communication, that level. Try it. That marathon session, one time, will remake a marriage. And if it is done before the marriage, it will make a difference in establishing the quality of that marriage. There are several steps for forming a marriage in the first place. And one thing that I want to point out is that in our culture, we've come to a time where marriage has changed in its identity, in its description, definition, in our time from the ancient ideas of marriage. First of all, we live in a secular culture in which the terms of marriage are dictated by law. So it's a matter of a legal contract. And unfortunately, for most people, it has become just that. It is a legal contract between two parties that is sanctioned or blessed by the church. In ancient time, a marriage was instead a spiritual union that was a worship together of two individuals, and it was accomplished not by a contract issued by the state and signed and made legal, but it was accomplished by a blending of the two individuals in a spiritual union in a worship function. And it was not recognized as even having happened until those two consummated the marriage by a satisfactory coming together in the sexual expression. That itself was part of it. That union was the completion. So one part of it was a recognition by the community in which they lived of the manner in which they came together worshipfully to blend their energies and their spirit. And then the second was accomplished alone by themselves with God, and was evidenced then in the way that the two spirits blended. And because it was not a legal contract, it was not something regulated and terminated by the state. The thing that you should recognize about marriage is that when marriage occurs, there is no such thing as divorce. It's not a matter of whether I approve or disapprove of a divorce, but rather I'm only saying that divorces only happen where marriage didn't. It can only happen where marriage didn't. Because a marriage is a blending at every level of consciousness, all 7 of those levels between two individuals. It is a blending of the two individuals sexually, and if there is a disharmony on that level, and they can't get that together and harmonize in the enjoyment of that, then one of those seals didn't bond. And on the emotional level, on a heart level, and on a mental level, an understanding level, a communication level, on all of those levels, when that bonding occurs, the word marriage itself, means the bonding together of two materials to form a third material, which is called an alloy. You take two metals and marry them, and you have not two metals sandwiched or glued together, but you have a third metal. And that third metal is an alloy of those first two, and it's inseparable. You can't take it back into those first two again. So divorce is impossible from a married metal, from an alloy. Divorce is also impossible between two individuals who actually got married. So if people ask me, is divorce wrong? Is it possible that you approve of divorce? It's a matter of how can I approve or disapprove. There's nothing more than the separation of two individuals who didn't get married. And if marriage occurs, then they're not going to ask me about divorce. If there is something in the marriage that is a disagreement, some disharmony that needs to be worked out, then I want to do that. What I want to do is make of that incomplete marriage a whole marriage, ideally. Otherwise, by all means, all you're really asking me is if I think that it is all right to terminate a legal contract. That's not something for me to answer anyway. I'm a spiritual counselor, not a legal counselor. And a state-formed contract, follow the directions of the state for terminating that contract. The marriage is a different matter. The marriage is built and terminated, if it is terminated, by something deeper than the making or dissolution of an agreement. It is something that happens between the two individuals over a period of time through a devotion of blending their energies on every level of their being, and not saving out any part of that as an exception to that blending. That's the way it should occur. I've just gotten started. But it's too late to continue. So I think if I'm allowed to take the time, I'll take a couple of questions on any of these areas that were brought up. Is there anything that I left you unclear about or left in a puzzle?
You said you were going to give us some little thoughts to say. So
Okay. What I was talking about there is self-talk, which is what your attitudes and opinions and communication is made of. And let me tell you just this briefly about it. The way that you think is by a process of running words and ideas through your mind. Your self-talk, talking to yourself, goes on all the time, even through sleep, which produces your dreams. You're constantly telling yourself things about yourself and about other people. When you meet people, you are thinking in self-talk. You're wondering about them, you're forming attitudes about them, and you are thinking about yourself and what they may be thinking about you. And the result of meeting them for you will be a result of the talk that went in your mind as a result of that meeting. You will form attitudes and relationships and emotions out of your self-talk. If you will keep a record of your self-talk over a period of time, just start writing it down. What are the things that you say to yourself about yourself? Watch especially for any negative or limiting statements. There are three kinds to be especially watched and avoided. One is any thought that cancels or diminishes the importance of yourself. Number two is any thought that attributes hopelessness to the situation. Self, situation. And the third, any that cancels out the joy or success of the future. The situation is hopeless, this will never get anywhere, I know what's going to be the outcome, it always happens to me. If you find yourself thinking or saying those thoughts, then that negative self-talk is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You are giving instruction to your unconscious. Positive self-talk is called affirmation. Take an affirmation, an affirmative statement, that is the belief that you want to hold about yourself. It may be the opposite of what you've been saying about yourself. I am unworthy, everybody treats me this way. Whatever your thoughts are about yourself, they're not serving you. Replace them with a positive statement that is an affirmation. The thing to do with that affirmation is to run it through your mind as consistently as you possibly can for at least 21 days. Now, the reason that I say 21 days is because it takes approximately 21 days for the average individual to form a permanent groove in the brain, which is a new pattern of thought or a new habit. To establish a new habit, it takes 21 days. It takes 21 days to change a self-talk habit from a negative into a positive self-image. So if you want to learn to love yourself, put in affirmations of self-love, self-worth, self-appreciation, and self-respect. Create those affirmations and repeat them constantly, around the clock, no matter what you're doing. If you're walking along the street, you're working at whatever you do, run those affirmations through your mind until that they become the pattern of what you tell yourself about yourself. Your self-talk creates your self-image, and it creates your success or your lack of it. It can create destruction. One more quick question. We have to go. I see some people getting frantic.
Yeah, you were talking before about the orgasm. You were talking about the crown, and I don't understand exactly how to do it. What I'm saying is just...
You want me to demonstrate?
What I'm saying is, I mean, just before the orgasm, you are thinking about something else?
No.
What do you
No. At the moment of orgasm, essentially, you are feeling a one-pointedness of awareness and sensation and energy focalized at a particular point. What you want to do is deliberately move that point of energy so that instead of feeling that energy and sensation and feeling are rushing out of you, that you're turning loose of it with your muscles and your mind and with the sensation, you deliberately try to draw that back into you. Feel as if you are pulling. At the same time the body is trying to release, you are absorbing, drawing back into yourself with your muscles, with your thoughts, with your attitude and your intent, and visualize and image that energy or vitality or light, the essence that is contained, draw it into yourself and up through yourself to the crowd. And see if the quality of sensation that you had in the genitals can be felt in the crown, literally. If you can transfer the point or the focus of that sensation to the crowd, then you will experience the orgasm in the crowd, and you will experience the energy releasing through the crowd. And you will probably leave the body, which means that you go on a little astral trip for a short time, or maybe beyond the astral, and find yourself unconscious for a few moments. And then you will return in the same way, but you'll return revitalized. And you probably, well, the first time it happened to me, I laughed and giggled hysterically for about 3 hours. I think Daniel probably remembers that. It was ridiculous, uncontrollable sensation. I just laughed and laughed and laughed, but it was wonderful. It was like I was 3 feet off the floor, and I wasn't sure I wanted to get back into my body, but it was a hysterical experience. Okay.
Sometimes rather than getting involved in sexual activity, I might rather follow through some other form of self-expression like art or dancing, moving my body. Is that the same thing? It's not intellectual.
Yes, you are reinvesting the creative energy in a different outlet or a different expression. And if you and your partner can agree on the rhythm of that expression so that you are both fulfilling your relationship and you are measuring the amount of energy that you express sexually, and you are also keeping that energy alive and expressing it through art or creativity or thinking or whatever else. You're keeping it alive, you're using it, you're investing it. And that's ideal. Make a rhythmic pattern of it so that you're satisfying both. Okay, we better stop there. Thank you very much. I enjoyed sharing.